Hierarchical autonomy. Hayek, in his masterful book, The Road to Serfdom, includes a chapter entitled, Why the Worst Get on Top. His argument is that centralized power, especially economic power, is a lure for the most unscrupulous men in society. He believes that by the very fact of the concentration of economic power in the sphere of civil government, a strong impulse toward totalitarian rule is established. What he says about the civil governments could be easily applied to any non-market, essentially non-competitive religious institution. The more economic power that is lodged at the higher levels of the bureaucratic hierarchy, the less responsive will the leaders be to the demands of the membership. Grants any such organization a large degree of financial autonomy, and it becomes a likely target for takeover by the unscrupulous. The 20th century has witnessed the liberalization of virtually every Christian church, both Protestant and Catholic. Theological liberalism and political liberalism have been cooperating partners. A major factor in the success of the conversion of the churches to unorthodox creeds and actions is clearly the hearts of the congregational members. They have listened to the false prophets in the pulpits, complaining only when their leaders' radicalism has infringed on some cultural or economic preserve dear to the hearts of particular members. But a crucial institutional factor leading to the takeover has been the existence of endowed agencies within the churches, mission boards, educational institutions, denominational publishing houses, and so forth. The financial autonomy from the weekly contributions of the members has been a basic means of subversion. Part of this autonomy is provided by the irrevocable annuity schemes and long-term loan contracts. These favour the perpetuation of the institution in question, apart from the theological commitment of the institution. Its future supposedly rests on more income from prudent investments than on the preservation of its original theological standards. This, of course, is inevitable, given the nature of the trust agreements as indicated by the following sales pitch. Long after you have gone home to heaven, your influence can live on, here on earth. A gift to missions, to the ongoing work of the worldwide church, can mean that your Christian influence will live on through the years in dedicated hearts, hands and feet of the servants of Christ in the far corners of the earth. What an irresistible appeal for some elderly, unsophisticated widow who has a few $1,000s saved. And what a curse to the organization which offers her the appeal. It is sealing its own doom, theologically. The structure may survive, but the goals will change. Perpetual annuities and trusts reverse the promise of Solomon. The wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22b. Instead, we find that the wealth of the just is laid up for the sinner. The hypocrisy of the appeal to the elderly Christian to part with his money like this should be manifest. The donor, or in this case the usurer, is led to believe that the institution, in and of itself, can and will maintain its commitment to the establishment of God's kingdom. What the institution needs, the donor-usurer is told, is a permanent fund. The fund is crucial and not a commitment to theology. Theology will take care of itself. What is needed is money. The fund must expand, even if this means that Christians are turned into usurers, and economically imprudent usurers at that, given the fact of inflation. If the fund can just be built up, the leaders will be able to operate, irrespective of the hostility of the membership. The threat of funds cut off cannot exercise the same force. God save the fund. Financial autonomy of the hierarchy of an institution is the death knell of its original goals. There were many reasons why all debts were cancelled in the Old Testament every 7th year. Surely this was one of them. The civil governments, the banks in whatever form they took, the lenders, the debtors, and all other institutions were prohibited from living in terms of perpetual debt and irrevocable annuities, whether secular or usurious. The prohibition must have helped to preserve the responsibility of the bureaucrats of all kinds to the wishes of the people, just as the requirement of the tithe kept the people from becoming tyrants. Plural sovereignties were protected by the various provisions of the law. Each had its own rights, and each had its own limitations. None was to become permanent apart from the continuous renewal of God and continual acknowledgement of his sovereignty as absolute. The essence of Christian stewardship is simply this: full-time, irrevocable, personal responsibility before God. By their very nature, irrevocable trusts and annuities involve both giver, usurer, and debtor in revocable theological responsibility. The rate of interest may be irrevocable and utterly impersonal, but that is the only part of the arrangement that is. Christians are not allowed the luxury of such stewardship, for this kind of irrevocable finance is the abolition of Christian stewardship. There is justice in all of this. The churches that have been too mild and, quote, tolerant, end quote, to demand that their members tithe, though, of course, not to the church alone, which would be legitimate biblically, find themselves making usurers of their members because funds are so scarce. Too soft-hearted to enforce the law of the tithe, they have been utterly ruthless in devising a whole complex of usury schemes. But in doing so, they have linked their impersonal economic futures, their irrevocable external, quote, protection, end quote, to the survival of an inflationary economy. When price and wage controls are imposed, the endowments full of blue chips will fast turn into buffalo chips. These controls destroy both stocks and bonds. To the extent that our Christian institutions have participated in the, quote, economic genius, end quote, of the modern world, they will perish in terms of such genius. They will learn to their dismay that guaranteed prosperity, like guaranteed income for the widows, is never so simple as it seems. Debts incurred in faith of perpetual economic expansion cannot but fail in the long run. There is no such thing as linear, irreversible, irrevocable growth of population, of money in the bank, of new members, or the rate of interest. At some point, mathematical law informs us the exponential curve flattens out or falls. Judgment is coming.